and critical control issues. It has been a requirement in the UK since 2005 for food businesses to have a HACCP plan. It is a requirement from the World Health Organization, Farming and Agricultural Organization and World and Trade Organization that we should use HACCP during trade. What is HACCP? Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, or HACCP, is a globally accepted method for lowering the possibility of food safety risks. It is a progressive method of identifying hazards in food production and putting control measures in place to prevent, eliminate, or reduce these hazards to an acceptable level. It is a systematic preventative approach for food safety from biological, chemical, physical, and allergenic hazards in production processes, from raw material, production, procurement, and handling to manufacturing, distribution, and consumption of the finished product. Let's analyze what each of the words in HACCP mean. A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm. Analysis means to examine something. Critical means there is a specific limit for a variable. It is an important way that after this critical step, we would not be able to rectify it. Control is the measures you put in place to control hazards. Point looks at what is temporal through time or a spot geographically. The key definitions are crucial for understanding HACCP. Hazard something with the potential to cause harm, whether it be microbial, physical, chemical, or allergenic agents. Risk. The likelihood that a hazard may occur. This is usually expressed as the likelihood of the consequences occurring. Control measure. Any action or activity that can be used to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Monitoring. Conducting a planned sequence of observations or measurements of control parameters to assess whether a critical control point or CCP is under control. To build and implement a HACCP system, it is essential that prerequisite programs and HACCP plans are implemented. So, what does this terminology mean? The prerequisite programs are programs that are put in place in the company to control hazards in the environment and prevent contamination of the product. These are the aspects you need for your factory to work. Prerequisite programs provide a hygienic environment, operating conditions, and good manufacturing processes for personnel that reduce the risk of contamination of the food product. Hygienic practices need to be in place before doing HACCP. Common prerequisite programs may include, for example, cleaning and sanitation procedures, personal hygiene, traceability and recall programs, pest control programs and training. Receiving, storage and shipping procedures, among others, are also included. And the HACCP plans are prepared for each product or process and identify possible hazards and controls in place to make sure the hazards are prevented, eliminated or controlled to ensure acceptable levels in the food product. To develop a HACCP plan, there are 5 tasks to accomplish before the application of the HACCP principles. Assemble a HACCP team, describe the food and its distribution, describe the intended use and consumers of the food, develop a flow diagram which describes the process, and verify the flow diagram. After the 5 preliminary tasks are completed, the 7 principles of HACCP can be applied to ensure safe food production. These are normal operations for our processes, whilst HACCP is specific to each process and product. Now, let's go through the 7 principles of HACCP. Principle 1, conduct a hazard analysis. Principle 2, determine the critical control points, or CCPs. Principle 3, establish critical limits. Principle 4, establish a system to monitor control of the CCP. Principle 5, establish the corrective action to be taken when monitoring indicates that a particular CCP is not under control. Principle 6, establish procedures for verification to confirm that the HACCP system is working effectively. Principle 7, establish documentation concerning all procedures and records appropriate to these principles and their application. Principle 1 conducts a hazard analysis. This is where the processes are evaluated and where we identify where hazards can be introduced. All hazards are assessed and categorized into 4 groups: biological, physical, chemical, and allergenic hazards. The general definition of a hazard related to food safety is conditions or contaminants that can cause illness or injury. Biological hazards can include microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, yeasts, molds, and parasites. Physical hazards include objects that are hard or sharp, such as glass, metal, plastic, stones, or wood. Physical hazards can lead to injuries such as choking, cuts, or broken teeth. Chemical hazards vary in the aspect of production they are related to. Some potential chemical hazards are the improper use of pesticides, chemicals used on processing equipment such as sanitizers, or maintenance chemicals. Finally, allergens are mainly associated with the raw materials in your production. Are they correctly segregated? In this step, you will need to make sure that you have the expertise to make an accurate evaluation of the hazards. The hazard identification is done in 2 steps. First, the identification of hazards, then an evaluation of the hazard. The hazard evaluation is a determination of the degree of risk to the user from the identified hazard. Once the hazard is identified and evaluated, the team must identify all the hazards, decide which hazards need to be either eliminated or reduced to acceptable levels, consider the risks, assess the likelihood of either the survival or the multiplication of any microbiological hazards, assess the possible production or persistence in the food of toxins, chemical or physical hazards, and decide what control measures can be applied for each hazard. A control point is a step in a process at which control can be applied, but where loss of control would not result in a risk to health. A critical control point is a step in the process where it is essential to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Steps where there are significant hazards that are critical. If not controlled, they could make the final product unsafe and cause harm to the consumer. Steps that are not critical, that is, control points, are still important and require control. Critical steps need extra control through the HACCP system. No further step in the process will control the hazard. The team must identify critical control points. These are points where the hazard must be controlled or it will present a risk to the end user. Principle 2 is to determine the critical control points, or CCPs. Our critical control point is defined as a step at which control can be applied and is essential to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. For each critical control point, you will need to identify the preventive measure. Some examples of CCPs may include thermal processing, chilling, testing ingredients for chemical residues, product formulation control, and testing products for metal contaminants. How will you prevent the hazard? Use of specific temperature, pH, time procedures, etc. Setting the critical limits is the third principle. In order to prevent, eradicate, or minimize the occurrence of a food safety hazard to an acceptable level, a biological, chemical, physical, or allergenic characteristic must be regulated at a CCP to a maximum and/or minimum value known as our critical limit. For instance, setting a maximum or minimum limit for processing parameters that will control the hazard, such as temperature, time, humidity, viscosity, pH, salt level, chlorine level, etc. This is the CCP's critical limit. Corrective action must be conducted and all impacted products must be managed if this limit is ever exceeded. Setting criteria for every crucial control point is